There's a specific moment that arrives quietly in almost every life. A moment where the person you've been no longer fits the life you actually want. Yet changing feels terrifying, disruptive, even irresponsible. Most people ignore this moment for as long as possible, clinging to a version of themselves that once worked but has quietly stopped serving them. The ones who eventually thrive are rarely the ones who avoided this moment. They're the ones who recognized it early enough to act, before the cost of staying the same became greater than the cost of change. Why? Staying the same eventually becomes the riskier choice. Most people view reinvention as inherently risky, a leap into uncertainty away from the safety of what's familiar. But this framing misses something important. Staying exactly the same, refusing to evolve as circumstances, opportunities, and your own understanding shift, carries its own significant risk, one that often goes unnoticed precisely because it feels safer in the short term. Think about someone who built a successful career around a specific skill set, only to watch that skill set become increasingly less relevant as their industry evolves around them. Staying the same, refusing to develop new capabilities or explore new directions, feels safe because it avoids the discomfort of starting over. But this apparent safety is often an illusion, one that becomes increasingly costly the longer it persists, until the eventual reckoning becomes far more painful than an earlier, voluntary reinvention would have been. Why identity attachment makes reinvention feel like loss. One of the primary reasons reinvention feels so difficult is that it often requires releasing an identity you've spent years building, an identity that feels inseparable from who you actually are, even when that identity no longer serves your current circumstances or goals. This attachment isn't irrational. Identity provides genuine psychological stability, a coherent sense of self that makes navigating daily life considerably easier than constant uncertainty about who you are would allow. But this same attachment can trap people in versions of themselves that have become outdated, uncomfortable, or limiting. Recognizing that identity itself can evolve, that releasing an old version of yourself doesn't mean losing your core values or fundamental worth, becomes essential for approaching reinvention without the paralyzing fear that change means erasing everything you've built up to this point. Why waiting for the perfect moment usually means waiting forever. Many people delay necessary reinvention because they're waiting for ideal conditions, enough savings, enough certainty, enough external validation that the change will succeed before they're willing to begin. This waiting often becomes indefinite because perfect conditions for significant change rarely arrive in the tidy, complete form people imagine while waiting for them. Genuine reinvention typically requires beginning before you feel fully ready, developing the necessary capability and confidence through the process itself, rather than waiting to possess these things fully formed before starting. This doesn't mean reckless, impulsive change without any planning or consideration. It means recognizing that some uncertainty is inherent to any genuine transformation, and waiting for that uncertainty to disappear entirely before beginning often means waiting far longer than necessary, sometimes indefinitely. Why small, deliberate experiments reduce the risk of larger reinvention? Effective reinvention rarely happens through a single dramatic leap from one complete identity to another. It typically develops through smaller, deliberate experiments, testing new directions, new skills, new ways of engaging with the world before committing fully to any single path. These experiments provide valuable information, both about what genuinely resonates and what doesn't, without requiring the full commitment and risk of immediately abandoning your current path entirely. This experimental approach also builds confidence gradually, allowing you to develop genuine competence in new areas before your identity and livelihood depend entirely on that competence. Someone considering a significant career change might begin with smaller projects, freelance work, or skill development in their available time, gathering real evidence about their capability and genuine interest before making the full transition, rather than leaping directly into uncertainty without this preliminary testing. Why reinvention often requires releasing external validation temporarily. Significant reinvention frequently requires stepping back from external achievement and validation temporarily, entering a period where your competence in this new direction hasn't yet been proven or recognized by others. This period can feel deeply uncomfortable, particularly for those accustomed to external markers of success and validation in their previous identity or career. Successfully navigating this uncomfortable period requires developing internal validation, a sense of purpose and direction that doesn't depend entirely on external recognition while you're still developing genuine competence in your new direction. This internal stability becomes essential for persisting through the inevitable early period where reinvention feels uncertain and unvalidated by the external markers you may have previously relied upon for confidence and direction. Why timing matters more than people realize. While reinvention is possible at any point in life, timing significantly affects both the difficulty and the ultimate outcome of the process. Reinventing yourself earlier, before circumstances force the change through crisis or obsolescence, generally allows for more deliberate, strategic transformation than reinvention forced by external circumstances beyond your control. This is why recognizing the early signs that reinvention is becoming necessary, growing dissatisfaction, declining relevance, a persistent sense that your current path no longer fits, matters considerably. Acting on these early signals before they develop into full crisis provides significantly more resources, time, and strategic flexibility than waiting until external circumstances force the reinvention under considerably more pressured and constrained conditions. Why reinvention doesn't mean abandoning everything you've built. A common misconception about reinvention involves assuming it requires completely abandoning everything from your previous identity or path, starting entirely from scratch without any continuity from what came before. In reality, effective reinvention typically builds upon existing skills, knowledge, and relationships, redirecting and recombining these existing resources toward a new direction rather than discarding them entirely. This means reinvention often looks less like starting over completely and more like strategic evolution, identifying which elements of your existing foundation remain valuable and relevant, while consciously developing new capabilities and directions that build upon rather than replace this foundation entirely. This approach reduces the risk and difficulty of reinvention considerably, allowing you to leverage existing strengths while still genuinely evolving towards something new. The art of reinventing yourself before it's too late isn't about abandoning who you've been in favor of someone entirely unrecognizable. It's about recognizing when the version of yourself that once served you well has quietly stopped fitting your current circumstances, and having the courage to evolve deliberately rather than waiting for external forces to make that evolution unavoidable and considerably more difficult. This requires releasing rigid attachment to a fixed identity, beginning before conditions feel perfectly ready, testing new directions through smaller experiments, and building internal validation that can sustain you through the uncertain early period of genuine transformation. Those who master this art aren't the ones who avoided difficulty entirely. They're the ones who recognize the moment for change early enough to navigate it deliberately, rather than being forced into reinvention under far more difficult circumstances later.